It was late afternoon on Friday, May 31st, 1985, and there was a rapid and obvious change in the sky over western Pennsylvania. The quiet early summer clouds gave way to a violent storm front racing east of the Ohio state line into Erie and surrounding northwestern counties. The first tornado hit Albion, a small borough of 1,700, at about 5 p.m. Children were playing after school, meals were being prepared, and workers were returning from the day's labor when the tornado cut a 2-block wide path of death and destruction through the residential district. The evening paper was never delivered. The 11-year-old paper boy was among the first to die. After its work was done in Albion, this tornado went elsewhere and throughout the evening was joined by 11 tornado families, spawning 41 separate twisters that struck 13 counties, killed 65, and injured more than 1,000 Pennsylvanians. Several thousand homes and businesses were seriously damaged or destroyed. As the initial shock passed and rescue efforts began, the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency responded with activation of the Harrisburg and area emergency operations centers. Information was gathered and a picture of the destruction began to appear. This in turn prompted state response through National Guard, state police, and other agency activities. The governor was briefed on conditions known at the time. A disaster was declared and federal help requested. This was standard procedure in response to a terrible disaster. Normal reporting and recording procedures were pressed into service. Files, wall charts, stubby pencils, and phone contacts that generated a processing of paper. Procedures that represented almost half a century of service under difficult conditions in Pennsylvania. But a change was about to take place. When John Patten was named director in 1983, he brought to the agency a background in the effective application of electronic data processing. It was apparent to the new director that the 20th century offered a more effective and efficient way to administer disaster response. In 1983, the planning process began, and the May 31st disaster was a transition point. It was followed by a presidential disaster declaration in October and again in November in response to floods in the Northeast and Southwest. Each saw advancement towards the goal, both in hardware and the means to apply this new capacity to the response and recovery mission of the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. In fact, the disaster occurrences allowed the agency to measurably advance its timetable in acquisition and development of essential custom software. Wall charts gave way to video projection. File cabinets were replaced by disk and hard drives. Telephones were supplemented by direct connect computers, a mainframe, and other essential components in the new Emergency Operations Center. While its presence is impressive, its function within the agency is more important. It greatly increases the response capacity of the Commonwealth. It decreases the damage assessment process from days to hours. It permits rapid analysis of information which can be converted into definitive and timely recommendations to the governor. The result is a more appropriate and expeditious response in an effort to save lives and reduce property losses. It also allows the administration of the agency to expand its obvious reactive mission to a new and most important field, proactive programs. This is the new EOC in Pennsylvania. During a recent visit by others interested in the change, Director Patten explained the concept and its applications.
In any emergency, the ability to acquire information and to acquire it quickly is essential in determining the response that we will make to that crisis. Acquiring the information quickly, analyzing the impact of it, providing a weighting of it, so that we can determine what actually needs to be done is the essential ingredient in our capability to provide to the decision maker cogent and timely recommendations so that his decisions can then be integrated into the response effort and executed in a timely fashion. In today's world of communication satellites, computer technology, we have a capability to acquire that information the volume of it, and to assess the impact of that information such as we've never been able to do before. If we take that information and allow that machine to digest the great quantity of information that we have and to put some variables into it, and then if we make those judgmental factors which determine what we have to say to the decision maker so that we reduce the emergency to the routine as quickly as possible and take out of it those things that are truly unique to that crisis, then we can gauge our response and make that response timely, effective, and comprehensive. What we're about to show you today is the way that PEMA has adapted the computer to allow us to do this. It is the beginning of a program which allows us to review a number of incidents that occur in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and to show how we address those incidents. We anticipate in time that we will have all 67 counties of the Commonwealth integrated into this system so that truly it will be an integrated, comprehensive, and online network that will allow us to address the many crises that we have in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania on a continuing basis. I offer it to you as a way to deal with the problems that come before us every day and at least one solution to dealing with those problems. Last May, the Food Manufacturing Corporation of Philadelphia manufactures pesticides. They get their product in Institute, West Virginia, and they move it to Middleport, New York. That's about 196 miles, right at 200 miles of interstate highway in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The product they were moving was methyl isocyanate, the Bhopal chemical, and they wanted to move it over our highways. We got together with them and discussed with them what we needed to do, the kind of communications that we needed, how we needed to be informed when their trucks were coming into Pennsylvania, and how we needed to be in communications with them all the way along the line. If you go on the right side over here, you'll see on that right map where the route goes up the western part of the state. That's Interstate 79. That's where 196 loads of MIC transgressed our highway over that period of time without incident. And it was because we had communications with the plant, communications with the truck. We had coordinated with the state police to be in front of them, even where we had about a 10-mile interdiction around Bridgeville, Carnegie, out in the western part of the state. We had the state police that escorted the shipments through there and took them on without incident. Now, you look at the menu board over there, and it just shows some of the incidents associated with MIC shipments. And sometimes we had 2 shipments a day that were going through the Commonwealth, and it tells, as we generate our log here, where everything is, so that anybody in this operations center, or in fact in the Commonwealth, if we want to tie them into it, can see where that shipment goes and what the status of it is, and it works out very well for us. The next thing I'd like to show you is when the floods hit out in the Mon Valley in the 3rd through the 5th of November, we started to generate that kind of information here as to who notified us. If you look on the left side, you'll see where Ted Mellors in Fayette County was providing some information. As we compile those duty logs on a daily basis, and we recognize that we've got a flood of major disaster, then we need to compile that information so we can develop a recommendation to the governor. The recommendations that we compile in the case of the Mon Valley flood, I'm only going to show you Washington County. You see the economic background of the unemployment levels, the per capita income, those who are above the poverty line, those below the poverty line, the near poverty line, the elderly, those kinds of information that help us to determine what the per capita damage is and what the per capita recovery capability is, which is what FEMA uses in declaration disaster. And there again, you look at the number of municipalities that were affected, and you see the great number that were affected there. You notice also there was 1 fatality, and that was in North Charleroi. You look on the television monitor, and it'll give you a brief synopsis of everything I told you about the flooding as regard to that. Again, moving on, you look at the final statistics of the number of evacuees, the mass care center, guard troops who were involved, any unmet needs and the roads and bridges that were damaged as a result of that flood. And then finally the wrap-up, as you see there, 42 homes destroyed, 112 major damage, and then 607 that suffered minor damage. That gives you then some kind of assessment of what happened in that flood, how we track that. It is important that we're able to provide that information as we go on forward. The next one I'd like to show you is one that's a real concern to you and to me, and I think in the Commonwealth. The state of Pennsylvania is the most flood-prone state in the Union. Of all the problems we have more problems that are flood-related than any other problem. And I would suggest to you, until we can get a good handle on that, we've got a lot of work to do. You know, we have the I-flow system, which some of you are familiar with and some of you are part of. And the I-flow system will measure the amount of water that's coming down and fill up the little buckets, and it will tip over and trip the transponder and send the information to you and to us. And that's a one-dimensional answer. It tells us how much water is coming down. But it really doesn't put us in a posture where we can respond to what the water coming down really means. To do that, we need to know how much water is down, what the river stage is, what the soil saturation stage is, and how much water is being released from dams and utility containment structures and facilities, and then what the predicted rainfall will be over time. If we can get all of that and model it out, then I think we can get into the business of saying that water is coming and we ought to take some proactive measures to respond to it. What I'd like to show you here is what happens, for instance, when water comes down and what it really means to us. We're working with the National Weather Service to take all of the information I just mentioned to you and to put it all together so that we can model this out in our computer and see what the impact will be. We're going to do this in the three major water courses in the Commonwealth, in the Delaware system in the east, and the Susquehanna system, West Branch, Main Stem, and Juniata in the central part, and then the Monongahela and the Allegheny and the Youghiogheny and the Ohio in the western part of the state, and to see what really happens along those water systems, to put in some measuring points and to determine what happens at those measuring points and to draw some conclusions from there. This is a diagram of Milton, and it's along the Susquehanna and the West Branch of. What I'd like to show you here is what happens when water comes down. The flood stage at Milton is 19 feet. Now, we can throw up on here what happens when we get to the flood stage, what it really means to us. On the other hand, if the water goes to 22 feet, what does that mean to us? And we can put up on the screen then a shaded pattern that will show 22 feet. Bear in mind that 19-foot red mark that you saw, that's the flood stage. At 22 feet, you'll see that blue inundation pattern along the Susquehanna there. That shows you what happens in Milton. We can go to 24 feet and show you an additional inundation pattern. Now, that indicates to you that there are some problems in the streets and in the major buildings in Milton. We can discriminate which buildings those are, which facilities those are, and find out what the real impact is. Now, I would tell you that if we can, as I mentioned, measure with I-flows what's coming down, take all of the other data that's coming together and model it out in our machine and come up with the information like this. And we do this whenever water is beginning to come down. If we have some indication at 2 o'clock this afternoon that we have water rising in Milton and that it's likely to crest at about 9 o'clock tonight, and we've got the river stage data, and then we take the forecast data, and it tells us that at 9 o'clock tonight we'll have this kind of inundation pattern, we would say, well, it's still daylight. And talking to the coordinator, you might give some thought to getting mobility impaired folks out. You might think about opening a mass care center. Do you need sandbags? Do you need to warn people, to activate the emergency broadcast system, to tell people to get their possessions out of the basement and in some cases off the first floor? When we do that, we can then really do some things to safeguard the life of the people in the Commonwealth. The house is going to stay, and the property will probably sustain damage, but I think we can minimize that damage that's done and certainly do an awful lot to save the lives, and that's really what we're about.
Another capability that we have with this equipment is to enable us to identify quickly where resources are available in time of need to respond to any crisis that we may have. We can look at some of the equipment that we maintain in the Commonwealth that we can bring out of stocks or to make available to counties and see where it is and call it up on the machine and then quickly identify where these resources are. As an example, let's run through and look at some of the sandbags, piping and equipment, pumps that we have in our stocks and see where they'd be. For instance, what kind of sandbags do we have in Warren County? And we can ask the machine to go to Warren County. You see the cursor moving there, and it will tell us then how many sandbags we have in Warren County and who the point of contact is there. Then from there we can see that we have a total inventory of sandbags, burlap type particularly statewide, and you notice that we've got more than 350,000 sandbags in the Commonwealth that we can make available to respond to various floods and disasters that we may have. Another one, as I mentioned, would be the piping. Let's, for instance, ask how much 8-inch piping we have in Center County. And if the cursor moves to that, the machine will show us that we have 8-inch piping at the Rockview Correctional Facility. There's more than 10,000 feet there. Statewide, then, we look at the listing of our piping, 8-inch piping that we have available, and you see that we have more than 86,000 feet of piping throughout the Commonwealth that we can make available for diverting water or bringing water into a particular facility or offsetting some of the capability that may have been lacking either through interdiction or through disease that makes the existing system unusable. And the next part we were looking at pumps. What's our capability of pumps, let us say, in Union County? And there you'd see that our center in Selinsgrove, we have 3 pumps that are available. And then statewide, you'd look at, we're looking at more than 68 pumps that we have available, ranging in capacity from 100 gallons per minute all the way up to 1,500 gallons per minute. It gives the capability then of providing water pressure in some cases, providing water pumps in some cases. In any event, it helps us in responding to any kind of crises that we have. And the third resource, or fourth resource that we might look at would be generators that we've got available. Let's go, for instance, to our center at Fort Indian Town Gap, and we'd see that out there we've got a quantity of. And then statewide, we've got 100 generators that are available, 2.5 kW generators, 5, 10, 15, 30, and 45 kW generators across the Commonwealth, giving us a total of more than 100. So when we look at the resources that are available, those are some of the most needed resources, and this is where we have them either by particular location or in total statewide. And I think that gives us the capability of drawing that up quickly, knowing where it is, and being able to direct it to the scene of the crisis in very short order.
One of the real serious problems in the Commonwealth has to do with hazardous materials. Where are they located, and what does it mean? We don't have a good handle on that yet, and we're just beginning to develop that repertoire here in our computer system. But if you go to the Commonwealth and ask what we have here as far as hazardous materials concerned, you can see some red dots in there. That's where we've got information on it thus far. We can move the cursor to one of those. This happens to be out in the western part of the state, and ask the computer, what is it? What is stored there? What does it mean? And it will come up to you, and it will show you that what we're looking at is hydrochloric acid anhydrous. We do not put down the name of the plant here. We just happen to have the incident down and what the impact is. It will show you where it is, the fact that it's corrosive to human and metal, what the impact is, how it's stored, quantity of 55-gallon drums, where the address of the corporation that we're talking about, and who the individual to contact is, and then some notes about how this stuff is stored. And then you can come over to the other side and it'll show you the reference material in there as far as Department of Transportation reference is concerned, what the impact in that area is as far as residential is concerned, the institutional, the number of people in the workplace, and then any other natural engineering barriers that we have that tells us how we are able to attack that particular hazardous material where it's located on the plant. We need to develop this library because across the Commonwealth we have an awful lot of this. The next one that's near and dear to everybody's heart is RERP, Radiological Emergency Response Planning. What I'll show you first then is in the case of TMI, we're looking at first the 50-mile ingestion pathway zone around that plant. And then you see in the smaller circle the 10-mile emergency planning zone. It shows in there the major routes, in this case the Susquehanna River that runs through it, and the cursor shows you basically where the plant is located. The ingestion pathway zone, as you know, is important for knowing where we have impact as far as stored feeds are concerned and cattle that have to be put on those stored feeds. Now we take it down to the 10-mile emergency planning zone here, and obviously the lighter shading, which shows you that the EPZ tracks geographic boundaries that are easily identifiable. But in here, again, it shows you where we are and the major routes that are surrounding TMI. Now, as you know, in the case of TMI, there are 5 risk counties and 6 support counties around that institution. We can show you any part of this zone here of the emergency planning zone. We can take that down to an arc if we wanted to show you a slice of it, for instance. And it will now show you down in York County is what we're showing here. But this is important to be able to segment where we are because we have the 360-degree evacuation circle that we work with, and we need to know if there's any impact on any of the routes around any of the areas. Now also, we can go to any particular county, the 5 risk or 6 support, and we can see what's located there. In this case, we're looking at York County. You see the red line in the upper portion of the map. That shows you the emergency planning zone part of York County. Also gives you the major routes and things that we'd be interested in York County. If you look on the television monitor now, it shows you that at TMI, we're at alert status. From here on out, as we simulate the plant status, it'll show up on the television monitor, and that shows what needs to be done. In York County, as we go through the planning exercise, one of the things we'd be concerned about if there's an incident and evacuation was proposed would be where the traffic control points would be located. We can ask the computer where they're stored, and you see them show up here. Then if you want to move the cursor to any one of those traffic control points and find out what it is, where it's located, and who mans it, we can ask the computer what that is. You saw the cursor where it's located. That will now tell us what that traffic control point is. It's post number 13 in York County. It's I-83, exit 10 off Interstate 30, or Interstate I-83 and US 30, and who it's manned by, PSP, Troop S, what the status of it is, and where we are, if there are any comments that we need to make about that particular one, as you see here. We can also ask the computer the next question that would be important to us, and that is having to do with access control points. We move people out, we want to make sure that they don't come back in again, and we would ask then what the status of that would be. Computer would tell you. Let me also point out on the left side of the board over here now, in that menu board over there, you'll notice a number of activities coming up there, have a number beside them. As those numbers are flashing, it will tell you that those activities need to be accomplished. They have not been completed for either the risk or support counties where it's appropriate. As the actions are completed, they go solid. And so if the status of the plant changes, we need to find out from that board what actions have been completed. Those that are not completed, we need to decide then, do we override, do we carry them forward, do we make a a major effort to get them completed right away before we go on with any other action regarding TMI. So it's kind of a checklist of that prompts a decision of what we need to do in response to an incident at 3 Mile Island. Over here, I mentioned about the access control points. We moved the cursor to one of them, and I never know which one they're going to put up there, but it will tell you which one it is. It happens to be access control point number 13 also, and it's also manned by Troop S. It will tell you where it's located and when it was operational. It gives us a capability of knowing all of those traffic flow control measures around the plant, and particularly in York County. The other thing we can ask about, of course, would be mass care centers when we move people out, where we're going to put them if they come out of the TMI, the EPZ in York County. This one happens to be at the Spring Grove High School. It will give you the status of where it's located, who the point of contact is, what the telephone number is, and what the capability is in that particular facility. It will also tell you then what the feeding capacity is and what the sleeping capacity is. Any notes that we have there, the fact that it's one of 4 centers in that school district is probably important in terms of knowing the total impact in that school district. Currently, what the occupational status is, how many people are there. This will tell you in York County then where all of the mass care centers are in York County, give us a capability of being able to determine our total capability in that county. I'm only going to show you York County, but we have the capability to do all of that. That's off-site. If we have an incident at the plant, we need to be able to determine for the governor what the nature of the incident is. Here you've got a total schematic of the plant. And although this is a rough approximation of all parts of the plant, it suits our purposes. It's not a true graphic of it. But we can break that down into the component parts of the plant and show you whatever we want to show you. In this case, the steam, cooling, and feed water system. Likely if we had a problem, we would have it there. Now I would tell you that you see some black dots look like in there. We can move the cursor to those critical features and ask the computer what the problem is with any one of those, and it will tell it. Look here where the cursor was located at the condensate pumps, and what that really means to us, where they're located, and what problems we would have on the plant. That was, I mentioned, in the feed water system. We can go to the other side of the plant and show one of the other components of it. The steam cooling and feed water system here, we'll go from there, I think, to the reactor side. This, we have the reactor building. Clearly, if we're going to have a release, it will be in the reactor building. We can move the cursor to a critical element in the reactor building, and the computer will tell you what that means, and as it showed in the other point, and we can go on from there. The other third part of the building then is the auxiliary building, and that happens to contain the third barrier to preclude release of nuclides, and that's what you see in here. Again, we have some critical valves and junctures on there. We can move the cursor there, ask the computer what it says, and it will tell you what the nature of that system is and what the malfunction capability is and what the impact is. Now, I will tell you that what you see in here is just the tip of the iceberg. And the people that work in here, they are not permanent operators in this operations center. It's very small, and as you know, we're a small agency. But in here on a daily basis, there are only 2 or 3 people that work here full-time. Everybody else comes from throughout the agency, and whenever we have a crisis, they come in and they pitch in. Those people that you see here are also augmented by a good number of people, same sections represented from throughout the agency, behind the doors that you can't see. And they operate our teletype, our message center, our communications capability. So the tip of the iceberg that you see here is translated into the messages outgoing and the messages incoming and the processing of those throughout the agency and in its communications setup. That's what we've got here. We think it's a very dynamic system. We think it gives us a capability to be able to manage a crisis with some capability that we can develop cogent recommendations, make them in a timely fashion to to the decision-making authority and then take the decisions that are made and implement them across the Commonwealth expeditiously.